We're going to wait just a moment, a couple minutes, to let everybody join in. There are a few people who said they were joining. We don't see them yet. Good to see you. Good to see your screenshot, Daniel. Hey, Suzanne. Nice to see you, Mitra.
Nice to see you.
Got some new folks today. That's awesome. Is everybody happily Zooming out these days?
You know, I was talking to my fiance. They start their Zoom meetings because you can use the whiteboard. They do Pictionary for the first 5 to 10 minutes just to get rid of the Zoom fatigue and do something fun.
Does anyone remember? I don't know how old you all are. There used to be a show, Zoom.
Yeah.
Zoom.
Come on and Zoom, Zoom. Yeah.
It was just, little did they know.
I have to tell you though, I actually really like it. I'm not on it as much as I think most of you, so for me it's still really fun. Okay, so respecting folks' time, we're going to get started. So thank you all for joining. Hopefully you can see that screen. For joining us this afternoon, we appreciate so much that you have a lot going on in your busy day and you're Zooming often. And I know we kind of joke about it, but we really appreciate you joining us today and spending this time. And we've been listening to you and your feedback from the first 2 Zooms. This is our 3rd Zoom. Today we're focusing on Becoming a Defender, our youth organizing approach. And we're trying to move away a bit from too much talking and a little more community group sharing. So let's see if we can do this successfully with the breakouts. So I really just want to welcome you all to the 3rd session of Zooming for Human Rights Education. And now I'm going to pass to Adnan. And I'm Karen Robinson, the Program Director of Speak Truth to Power.
Great, thank you, Karen. As Karen mentioned, my name is Adnan Karim, and I get to proudly serve as the Managing Director of Human Rights Education here at Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, and I've been here for about a year. And what I wanted to do here is I want to start by reading a quote that probably those of you who are familiar with Robert F. Kennedy are aware of, but it really gets at the core of the essence of what the organization is really about and what we're striving to do. So I want to read the quote and then I'll go into more of what we do. So it reads, "It is from numberless diverse acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped. Each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring these ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance." And so I just wanted to read that quote because that again is at the core of what the organization is, and what we are trying to do is really live out those ideals, as he mentioned through his speech. And so Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights was initially started after his assassination, and the family thought about all the different ways that we could really honor his work, and instead of building a monument or a statue, it was really building a center and a foundation to really move forth and carry on his legacy towards social justice and his unfinished work in social justice. And so as part of our vision comes from one of his favorite quotes where it says, "Tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world." And that's really our sort of guiding vision. The foundation is his legacy and the work that he's built towards social justice. And there's a few different ways that we do that. First, we really work in partnership with local activists and attorneys through our advocacy and litigation to really hold governments accountable domestically and internationally, to protect journalists, to protecting farm workers, and a huge focus now on really looking domestically at criminal justice, specifically on bail reform, and really looking at, especially now as a response to COVID, to look at how we are really looking at people who are disproportionately and unfairly detained just because they can't afford bail, and looking at how we can decrease that kind of when jails are reaching their capacity, and really figuring out a way to stunt the growth of the coronavirus. And there's a lot of work in criminal justice. The second piece is really working with businesses, and we do that in a couple of ways. One is through our Compass program, where we really work with the investor community to make sure that when they talk about the ESG, they talk about environmental, social, and governance, a real focus on the social. So looking at the supply chain and ensuring that investors are really looking intentionally to see, are there practices within the company that they would invest in upholding human rights principles as it relates to that social good, and are they aligned with social impact, and acknowledging that that social impact is also a contributing factor to profit that is good for business. The other way that we do that is through our Workplace Dignity program, which is new, and really looking at how are employers really upholding and maintaining dignity in the workplace. That column that you see, that everyone is a human rights defender, that's the bulk of a lot of our educational work, whether it's through Speak Truth to Power and training educators and working with students to ultimately become a human rights defender. And we'll talk more about Speak Truth to Power. But we also have our Young Leaders program that is, I believe, in around 11 university campuses around the United States, focused on college students, looking at them, again, through the criminal justice angle of what they can do as young people to really affect change domestically. And then our last one is really celebrating our heroes through our legacy program. And that comes in the form of a lot of our awards, from our Book and Journalism Awards, of really upholding the freedom of expression and speech, and honoring those journalists and authors who are really, and many times, putting their lives at risk to really get information out there. And through our annual galas, where we give out a Ripple of Hope award to people who are really doing instrumental work in human rights. And of course, our Human Rights Award of honoring those organizations and individuals that have a track record of success of really upholding human rights. So that, in a nutshell, is who we are.
And I'm Laura Osterndorf. I'm the training manager for the Speak Truth to Power Human Rights Education program. And before we launch into what a human rights defender is, we thought that it would be important and useful to actually have a definition of human rights. So human rights are the rights a person has simply because they are a human being. Simple enough. Those rights are basic standards without which people cannot live without dignity. So in other words, to violate someone's human rights is to treat that person as though they are not a human being themselves. And human rights principles hold up the vision of a free, just, and peaceful world, and set minimum standards for how individuals and institutions everywhere should treat people. These concepts are all grounded in international standards, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where you'll see the articles here. These articles incorporate civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. So in terms of civil and political rights, you'll see things like freedom of thought and freedom of expression. And then those economic, social, and cultural rights are going to cover things like adequate health, right to equal access to public services, and of course, the right to education. And we wanted to show you these articles to, in part, give you this background, because the stories of human rights defenders are often impacted and shaped by the articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and human rights standards. So then we'll launch into human rights education. Human rights education is a deliberate and participatory practice aimed at empowering individuals, groups, and communities through fostering knowledge, skills, and attitudes consistent with internationally recognized human rights principles. And we hope that human rights education will act to build awareness, empathy, and understanding of the rights shared by all peoples. By engaging in human rights education, we want those individuals to feel empowered and also feel as though they have increased the control over their own lives and the decisions that affect them, specifically with a human rights lens. So at the bottom of this slide, you'll see that human rights education encompasses education about human rights, through human rights, and for human rights. The education about human rights section involves providing people with information about human rights principles, and about human rights standards and agencies that are responsible for protecting, promoting, and respecting human rights. The Through Human Rights section of human rights education involves learning and teaching in a way that respects both the rights of the learners and also the educators. So it's really important for educators to make sure that they're setting up a safe space for learners, to ensure that they're modeling those human rights values in their fabric of their pedagogy, and also to ensure that they're teaching with material that's consistent to human rights values. And then finally, the education for human rights will give people a responsibility to take that knowledge about human rights outside of the classroom and actually feel empowered to defend human rights themselves and become a defender. So I'll pass it over to Jenny now to talk about our work.
Can I?
Oops, it looks like Jenny's on mute.
I can't hear Jenny. Oh.
Sorry, I have a small child who's very enthusiastic, so I muted myself. Okay, so our program is based on Kerry Kennedy's book, Speak Truth to Power, Human Rights Defenders Who Are Changing Our World, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Speak Truth to Power is a multidimensional human rights education program that combines powerful storytelling and interactive learning to provide this generation with knowledge and tools necessary to end and prevent human rights abuses around the world. And currently to date, we've inspired approximately 5.7 million students, teachers, and community leaders, teaching them how to be empathetic and emboldened champions of human rights. Through our program, not only are we providing knowledge and understanding of human rights and human rights advocacy, but we're also redefining traditional education standards and creating a paradigm shift that will make morality, ethics, and human rights central parts of learning environments in order to solve some of our world's most pressing human rights issues. So on to our approach. What really sets our program apart from other human rights programs is our commitment to storytelling. All of our lessons begin with the stories of the lives and work of over 60 human rights defenders from all over the world. Each lesson is linked to the articles within the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And through storytelling, we're able to find unity and commonality with others, regardless of our different experiences. And that helps us build bridges between people with different beliefs and provides us all opportunities to build empathy. Our vision for a just and peaceful world through human rights education is also grounded in our theory of change. And that is that in order for future human rights defenders to do the work, we have to provide them with purposeful and intentional learning spaces grounded in human rights with targeted support and organized actions that are built on a solid foundation of effective practices, values, and beliefs. So on to our objectives. The main programmatic objectives are outlined on this slide. Our goal is to alter the way that we think about and approach traditional education so that all learning environments and educators have ingrained human rights education into the fabric of their pedagogy. And we do this by engaging with educators through tailored trainings that we host, which are aimed at providing them with skill sets to teach about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the human rights framework that supports it. We also offer assets that are connected to international, national, and local.
No, not today. She used a comment.
And thank you for muting. And throughout, through building our cohorts of lead educators, and the lead educators are teachers who have gone through all of our trainings, who have implemented Speak Truth to Power in a classroom successfully. We actually have four of them on right now: Chris, Pam, Josh, and Suzanne. Huge part of the work that we do. We couldn't do what we do without them. So we're so happy to have them on today. Our second objective is about reinforcing attitudes, mindsets, and behaviors in the learning process for all participants so that they advance and protect human rights in their everyday lives. Our lessons are aligned with social and emotional learning standards so that our programs facilitate the development of the appropriate mindsets, attitudes, and behaviors to be effective and mindful human rights defenders. And our last and third objective is that all participants identify as human rights defenders through actions large and small every single day to protect and advance human rights both globally and locally. And we do this through our Become a Defender toolkit. And this is where young people are equipped with the skill sets to take effective action in defending and advancing human rights through the transformative power of community organizing, individual acts of service and advocacy, and this can also be accomplished through the arts. This toolkit is also aligned to support meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. So back over to you, Karen.
Yeah, and that's what this whole session is about. So we're going to talk about our toolkit and becoming a defender. And before we get into our youth organizing approach, we want to hear from all of you. So let's see if I can actually do this now. So we're going to break into 3 groups. The group with Jenny is going to discuss who is a human rights defender. The group with Adnan will talk about what are the characteristics of a human rights defender. And the group with Laura is going to talk about how does someone become a human rights defender. So we're gonna get these breakout rooms in good order here. And then we're gonna go. Okay. I think, I hope everyone is in one. This is my first time doing this, and there's some people who, okay, here we go. Breakout.
Hey, Laura.
Hi, Pam. Hi, Suzanne.
Suzanne.
Hey, Dick.
Hi, Dick.
Hi.
All right. So I wonder if this is our full room. It might be, but that is great because we can all have a really excellent discussion, since you all know so much already, about how you think someone becomes a human rights defender. So obviously, you know, you're all familiar with the program. You're familiar with all the stories in our book, but if you had to put into words that process and how someone becomes a human rights defender, how do you think that happens?
You meet Carrie.
What? Oh.
Is it they meet Carrie? What do you mean, like in general or specifically for RFK?
I think let's go with in general. Like if you were presenting to your social work class, how would you describe how someone becomes a human rights defender?
They kind of have to put their passion into action, and understand what are the first, what are the rights, and what are the rights that are involved in any situation or that they're trying to make change around. What are the ones that really help to influence or impact a person's life circumstance in the, you know, in the moment, because all of them should be, you know, because that's one of the things that I'm struggling a little bit with, because, you know, the students are kind of find easily like a violation of human rights, but I'm trying to get them to look at, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that a right has to be being actively violated, but that it could have the potential for not being fully realized, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that our work and kind of as a human rights advocate or a defender is really to make sure that everything's, you know, to yes, make sure that they're not being violated, but also to make sure that there's the ability to become fully realized. Right? Some of the rights might be, I don't know how to explain it at a little after 4 on the afternoon.
I'm playing. I feel like, you know, it's great to see you all at the end of the day, but it is the end of the day. So I think you explained it perfectly, though. I actually liked one of the first things that you said about channeling passion into action. And obviously, Karen, and I saw 1 more minute mark, so soon we're going to get a note to come back into our rooms. Oh, there it is. But yeah, I think we might be sharing out as a full group. So Suzanne, I would love if you would also share out later those thoughts as well, if you feel comfortable, because I think that they were great.
Well, and now I feel bad that nobody else got to share. You put me on the spot first, Laura.
Luckily, I see you guys all the time, so I get to hear from you all. So, all right, we can leave the room, but thanks so much.
Yeah.
All right, a few people come. Hey, Josh.
Hello, how are you, Karen?
Good. All right, Laura's group's back. I think we're just missing Jenny's group. Ah, here they come. Here they come. Jenny's group is back.
Yay!
Hey. All right. So how did that work? Because I've never done it before. Was that okay?
Good
Yeah,
job.
that was great.
Cool. All right.
Short of time, but
Excuse me?
it was a little too short of time.
Yeah.
But it worked out well. You
Okay.
you done good, Karen.
I'm trying, Suzanne. All right, so let's hear a report out from Jenny's group. Who is a human rights defender?
So we were talking about how when you ask someone to name a human rights defender, that the first place people usually go are to those who kind of make change in a large way, the Mahatma Gandhis and the Kailash Satyarthis, and they don't think about themselves as an active participant or one who is able to make change in the world. So with that in mind, and also realizing that Gandhi and Kailash are extraordinary human beings, the students in the classrooms of the teacher we were talking to are human rights defenders, and that anyone can be a human rights defender if they know how to be a human rights defender, and that it's so important to provide information to students as to how to become a defender so that they understand how to, and that they're empowered to become one. So that knowledge is a super important piece in becoming a human rights defender.
Great, thank you. Adnan, your group?
I'll let Mitra, Chris, or Josh answer that one.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about kind of the same thing, that a human rights characteristics of a human rights defender is somebody who has, as Mitra said, kind of the presence and awareness to speak up when it's important that somebody's voice is heard, but then also has the courage to stand for what's right, speak their mind, and not to be cowed by those who would silence them.
Great. And Laura's group, how does someone become a human rights defender?
So our group, we were having such a good conversation, but I had too short of a time, but I'll put Suzanne to answer that, since she has some really good thoughts on this point.
All right, I just kind of led in saying it's somebody that actually puts their passion into action and realize, you know, just as the other two groups indicated, you know, that you have this desire and realization of the changes that need to be made, and that you actually move that desire into action.
Awesome. Thank you all. And just to remind, we will have time to all share at the end, a kind of a community share about this work. So thank you so much for that report out. And I want to just jump to the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. Did we all know there was a UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders? And in essence, it says that a human rights defender is individuals, groups, and associations peacefully contributing to the effective elimination of all violations of human rights, fundamental freedoms for people and individuals. So it's not saying that you have to eliminate them. It's not saying you've got to do it by yourself. It doesn't say you have to have a Nobel Peace Prize. It's the action, right? So Adnan read from Robert F. Kennedy's Day of Affirmation speech, that idea of a ripple. So if you're a ripple for good, if you're a ripple for advancing human rights and social justice and peace and freedom in this world, you're a human rights defender. And we're going to talk about this a bit more when it comes to how our students realize that, how they understand their agency. But this is kind of really where we sit, that a human rights defender is basically anyone that is really working to eliminate violations of human rights and violations of fundamental freedoms. Pretty straightforward. Okay. Okay, so we're going to go into another set of breakout groups. I promise to give you more time here. And now we're going to think about that question. How do we support our students, right? So many of our students have service requirements, or they want to do that one-off thing that's going to look really great on their resume. But how do we as educators work with our students to kind of move them to a different place in their understanding of themselves, their community, and their personal role and responsibility in all of that? It's a pretty hefty question, I know, so I'm going to give you a little more time. But this is what, you know, when you talk about education for human rights, this is that transformative piece where our social, emotional, cognitive, moral, social development is all about this greater understanding. So we're going to step back into our breakout groups, and I'll give you more time here to chat about that question. And we recognize it's a big question, all right? So I'll see you in 5 minutes. Please join.
Hello.
Hi. There they are.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I know it's kind of a lengthy question, so I put it in the chat again. Pam, I know you're speaking later in the presentation, and I'm really excited to hear that. I don't know if you had any separate insight from what you were going to share later on this question, but Pam and Dick, since we didn't hear from you last time, did one of you want to share your thoughts on this?
Dick, why don't you start? You're muted.
Oh.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. I could have spoken for a long time and I guess two things occurred to me. One is starting with really small steps, because I think the first thing that often happens is you know, listening to what we heard from the other groups, people think right away of the big names, and then they think of these dramatic things like a young man standing in front of tanks or things such as that. They become overwhelmed and fall out of the conversation. So encouraging them to realize simple things like sitting with a student who's being bullied in the cafeteria is a positive. And then the second thing I would add to that is really drawing out for them how it makes them feel. You know, the idea that, you know, you really feel good inside. And if you feel good inside, you know, you want to keep reinforcing that, and you would encourage them to keep moving forward. So I think those are two elements I would want to see as part of any conversation about it.
I love that you brought in the feelings piece of that as well. I feel like at STTP, you know, and we're really making a big push for the social and emotional learning component of the human rights defenders and their actions. And, you know, like part of obviously analyzing and recognizing and managing your emotions is part of that. And I really liked the example that you gave as well with it doesn't have to be like standing on the picket lines. It doesn't have to be what people traditionally think of when they think human rights defenders. It can literally be a small action like sitting with someone being bullied. So I think that was perfect. Pam, would you like to share next?
Yeah, thanks. I guess, you know, a combination of what Suzanne said and Dick, going into the emotional aspect. For 10 years, you know, in the classroom, and then also I have a club, and trying to motivate students or inspire them. And what comes to my mind time and time again through experience is going to the emotional piece and having students connect. You know, when you want to teach someone about a courageous defender, anyone, whether it's Kailash or your local community member, you have to, kids have to understand what it feels like to have courage or not feel like, or what does it feel like to persevere in whatever case in their own lives that they do it. So by connecting that way, I think that like it develops a strong universal connection between the student and the defender. If they can say, hey, you know, I remember a time in my life when I showed courage too. And when they develop that emotional connection, it develops a bond. And I think that taps into, as Dick mentioned, you know, starting with baby steps and small steps, that taps into the ability to go further.
Absolutely. And that personal and emotional connection, like you said, like it does enable them to go further. It makes it sustainable. So it's not just like a one-off. I think it's that passion or whatever you have it like embedded within you at that point. I guess courage. Yeah. Like you said. Excellent. Suzanne, would you like to share?
I obviously agree with both of them, but I really like the point that Dick mentioned about, you know, the importance that they can see themselves in the role, and it's not that they don't have to be, you know, the big names, and that it's important also, I think, to try to identify local community people that they know, that they can make those kind of connections to say, okay, you know, who's in my school or who's in my community that is showing courage as well, and how are they, you know, what does that mean like in everyday life for them, instead of just thinking, oh, okay, I can connect it, but then I'm still relating it to some, you know, to like somebody far away, you know?
Yeah.
So being, you know, one of the things that we just love is, you know, having the play, we show the play at orientation for our students, and, you know, each one of them connects with different defenders based on those connections that Pam was talking about, like being able to, like, you know, almost what do you connect most with as far as like the topic or the rights or the issues. But the thing that we enjoy about it is that then they're not the well-known ones, you know, people in the play that are featured. So that they can start beginning to see that, you know, you don't have to have the Nobel Peace Prizes and be making big things. So,
Laura, can I jump in for a second?
Yes.
What Suzanne said something and it reminded me, for about 20 years, I've done this beach cleanup. Dick knows the Kings Park Bluff. And I would bring literature and stuff about Wangari Maathai and the environment. And time again, the kids come with their slip for their hours that they want to get. So they want to do that one-time thing and get their hours, right, for community service. And there was a transformation that happened over the course of the cleanup. You'd see them come back with their bags and their data cards. And after a while, they didn't think about the hours they were getting. They were sweating, they were involved, they were engaged in the hands-on aspect of the event.
I'm sorry we missed the end of what you were saying, Pam, but it was excellent.
I know.
Suzanne inspired me. I just, you know, Karen, I was saying I do this beach cleanup every year for almost 20 years, a local one, for International Coastal Cleanup Day. And I would bring paperwork and lessons about Wangari Maathai as well, with the environmental connection. And, you know, it never failed. You know, the kids would all show up with their paper to be signed for their community service hours. And that's cool. You know, I was happy to have as many volunteers as I could. But sure enough, what was so great was that over time, each time they would go back and get more trash and fill in their data card, they were sweating. They weren't thinking about the hours anymore. The time went past the time when they would have gotten their 2 hours. And they were so engaged in the hands-on work that it made me want to keep doing it every year. So I think that's what you're saying. It was that one-time thing just to get the service requirements, so to speak. So the grassroots doing part is so important in connecting emotionally.
Yeah. So Suzanne, was that enough time? Did I give you enough time? A little better?
A little bit, but we missed the end of Pam's story.
Oh, okay. And it seems that we've lost Adnan.
Uh-oh, again.
I know, he keeps disappearing.
We have to make a new show. Where is Adnan?
Yeah. And our numbers seem to be dwindling. I don't know if they're all in Adnan's group, but we can do a round of intros then. So then is anybody from Adnan's group here?
Yeah, Christopher.
Chris.
Josh
Chris.
is.
Yeah, you guys.
Mitra, yeah.
Okay, because it seems
Just
like
Adnan.
Where's Adnan?
Okay,
He might have left the meeting instead of left the breakout rooms.
Yeah, I see Daniel and Matthew. You guys were with Jenny. I feel like we've lost some people though because we're down. But I'm going to pay attention to your time and let's get started. So I'd love to hear just kind of some thoughts about this idea of how we support our students in this journey, in this transformation. Jenny, something out of your group?
I would like to turn it over to Daniel.
So we kind of approached it from a more systematic perspective. Like I think that I'm a teacher at an independent school in Colorado, and our kids just don't have time, and human rights seems to be still kind of a fringe. So we need to integrate it into our academic curriculum. We also talked about pre-service training and how teachers don't come into the classroom knowing how to do human rights education. And so we really looked at it more from that systematic point of view, because I think once kids can talk about things that are relevant and meaningful to them, they're totally into it. But are we giving them those opportunities, and do we feel like we are prepared to facilitate those discussions? And then we had also talked about just in some public schools, it's just seen as very polarizing, and teachers are muzzled in some ways in what they can and cannot talk about. And we need to move beyond human rights education as being a political issue, but more of a, it would support all the other topics that we're teaching.
Absolutely. Looking how it's mapped in more organically. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Someone from Adnan's group. Thank you, Daniel. Anybody from Adnan's group?
I'll just put out there that when I got on here, it was super exciting because Elizabeth is one of my former students, and it's like awesome to see her. She graduated a couple years ago, and like right there for me, that's just evidence that this all works. Because like she's amazing, did great work when she was in my class, and then did an independent study all on her own on human rights because she wanted to. So I think it is about just kind of what Daniel was saying, like exposing kids to this stuff because they will take it when there's an opportunity to do it. So
I had a great teacher for that. So
thanks, Elizabeth.
All right, so let's just jump quickly to Laura's, and then I'll pass on to Adnan to do kind of a recap.
Yeah, so our group had a really good conversation about the emotional piece of becoming a defender and taking action, but I want to pass the talking stick to Dick in my group because I don't think he's had a chance to speak yet.
Go, Dick.
Okay. Yeah, I think that the emotional part and the support part was a big section of what we talked about. The idea that you could begin with small steps, but it be critical that a small action that you work with the youngster in terms of building their understanding of how it made them feel, and hopefully the positive feelings they get out of it, and that those positive feelings would reinforce their own actions so that they act again, and potentially in an even larger, a larger event. So again, trying to avoid that one-off approach. If you're, once the action takes place, the key is to support them and to draw out their emotional feelings, and hopefully in a way that'll want them to act even more so in the same human rights behaviors.
Awesome. So I'm going to pass to Adnan to do kind of a recap.
Yeah, sorry, I got disconnected for a second, but I wanted to reiterate something that was mentioned earlier. One is, I think one of the things that we can do as educators to really support the development is making sure that we give students the right framework. And part of the framework that we are following is really aligning the action that students can take as it's aligned to the UDHR. And we can't stress how important it is to always loop it back into how it relates to the articles in the UDHR. But also now we have an opportunity to frame it within the Sustainable Development Goals. And what's different from the Millennial Development Goals with the SDGs is that the Sustainable Development Goals are purely made out of human rights and our commitment and our work towards that. And the beauty of the SDGs is that it states the problem and the need. And I think it's important for young people to also be able to feel like they're part of a movement, and framing it in that way with that explicit need and how far we are off in meeting those goals allows students to understand what groups exist out there to be part of a movement and feel like they are part of something greater than themselves. So that framework piece is really important. I caught on the last bit, I think, of what Daniel was talking about, and which is, I'm glad you pointed that out, because that's a bulk of where our work comes from, is through that training. Our work means nothing if we're not building educator capacity. And so how do we really, through our trainings, build that capacity for educators to really integrate the human rights pedagogy into their classroom? And it is a lot in that pre-service or that training framework. But the last piece that I want to highlight around what makes this different from one-off service or even service learning, which is a lot of the experience that I came out of, is this attachment to social emotional skills. And we talked about the emotional aspect a lot. And I'm thankful for our folks at Discovery Ed for framing it this way as our work with social emotional learning. If you think about the competencies in there, self-awareness as it relates to human rights education is, do students, and in your pedagogy, are you creating space for them to understand the importance of their social identity and how that plays a part in their work? If you think about self-management, how does then a young person cope with discrimination, whether it's discrimination that they're experiencing or as an ally on how they cope with discrimination as an observer or an ally in their direct world, and what does that mean for them? In terms of responsible decision making, is the decisions they choose to make in terms of being able to take action in pursuit of justice and equity, and in any decision that they make, is it pursuant of justice and equity, whether it's in their career or their further academic learning? The other piece is relationship building, is how are we fostering cultural fluency within the learning process? And then the last one is really around that social awareness, is do they recognize the cultural context? So when you put all of that together, especially here domestically with this need to really integrate social emotional learning, it creates another layer in language to be able to frame that development piece of getting students to understand the social emotional part to then be able to take that more intentional action. And so that's one piece that we're really happy that we're really moving forward in and evolving and strengthening our work, is that tie-in that it doesn't, you can do these one-off actions, but it means nothing if you're not at the same time nurturing the development of those social emotional learning skills. And that's where the big payoff happens ultimately for a lifetime commitment towards justice. And if I'm missing anything, Karen or team, please chime in.
No, I thought that was good. So So what we wanted to move into is what our organizing approach looks like. And we are in the process of refining and developing this. We have a Becoming a Defender toolkit that Jenny mentioned. We're revamping it, we're tightening it, we're adding to it based on what we've learned over the few years and based on working with so many of you. Interestingly, to have both Daniel and Matthew here, because we were all at Amnesty International together, and Joshua as well, and so many of these organizing ideas have come out of that history, but just basic community organizing grounded in some very fundamental elements. So I'm gonna go through this not super quickly, because then we want to hear from all of you. We have a couple of teachers who are going to share their experiences, and this will all be on our website, free resources. If you want to help develop this, just ping us and you can be part of that process. But in a nutshell, what we, regardless of the extent or degree or type of action that your student's taking, we really believe firmly in these 5 elements. And recognizing that depending on the age of the student that you're working with, these can be modified, adapt, you can enhance them, you can ramp them up, you can kind of break them down a little more. But first, for us at RFK Human Rights, is a basic understanding of what human rights are all about. What is the context within which you're living day to day? How do you understand that? How do you see that? How do you understand when rights are being promoted and protected, and as importantly, when they're being violated, right? When you see human rights denied in your community, that lens is very broad. From that perspective, that greater understanding, where do students find inspiration to take action? And it's so critical, as you all know, that students are inspired to do something, right? If they're not, then the actions won't have that transformative nature that we're all looking for, that transformative piece. And then another point I just want to raise here is the idea that students need to recognize that we all have bandwidth, right? You can be inspired to take action on many things, but you can't, right? You have limited time, limited emotional capacity, limited capacity, and that's okay. Find that thing that really, really drives you and own it. Have an informed point of view, right? You have the context, you have the passion, but challenge our students to dig a little deeper. And to Daniel's point, some of this is what could be mapped into various areas of study. Some of this could be an Amnesty chapter after school. It could be take various formations, but recognizing that good intention is not always good enough. That just because you think action is good, that we have to challenge our students to think about the impact of our actions. The last 2 pieces, one is a organized plan of action, and we're gonna go into that deeper in the next slide, but really thinking and helping your students think about the ways that they're gonna create this long-term sustainable change. And the final piece is measuring impact of the action taken, right? How does your action advance the rights articulated in the UDHR or Sustainable Development Goals? So those are the 5 key elements. The biggest piece of that, obviously, is the plan of action. Really helping students define their goal, even if the goal is something very simple, right? That they want to raise money for or collect food for a food shelter or a food bank, right? Have them understand that issue from a human rights perspective or sustainable development goal that you're addressing. Decide who has the power to bring about that change. Develop some really cool tactics to put pressure on that target. I have some really fun stories about that, but I want to get to the teachers, so I'm going to skip those fun stories. Get more people involved. But it's critical that you have this plan in place, so when people join you in the effort, that they understand what are the goals and what are the outcomes that you're all seeking. Have a timeline and a budget, take action. And then celebrate and recognize that even if you didn't succeed in your goal exactly, whether you failed or succeed, you're still moving in a direction. You've still learned something. And from that point of learning, that new place, you can continue to take action. So that was kind of a rush through that. But if you have questions, pop them in the chat. But it's really organizing 101 and really challenging our students and recognizing your point, Daniel, that some students don't have the time, they don't have the energy, they don't see how this fits in, some teachers don't. But if we can provide these tools and resources and training, in a way that makes it easier. That's what we're trying to do. So I want to send this now to two of our lead educators who've been involved in this. And why is there we go. I'm going to ask Chris and Pam to just share briefly kind of one of their stories. And then I want to open the floor up to everyone to hear about your stories as teachers working with your students. Chris or Pam?
Sure. So I'm Chris, and I teach in Connecticut. And I think one of the parts about RFK that's important, especially for educators, and I've shared this a number of times, is that it gave me the language to be able to kind of articulate what I was doing and why it was important to people who otherwise thought it was polarizing or political. So to the point I think Dan was making earlier, human rights is not a political thing, but yeah, I understand that there are people who kind of misguidedly think it is. And so I think one of the important parts about these trainings is that it helped me kind of be able to do that. And I started teaching human rights class not a few years ago, but before that I teach a regular social studies class, and I just make sure that when I work in the content and materials that I use, the about human rights, I purposely pick things that relate to that. So when I do the civil rights movement, I purposely pick things that relate to human rights as well, and kind of further it that way. And then one of the things we're talking in the breakout session is that I think, at least I try to, and I'm hoping this passes the sniff test because Elizabeth's right there and she can certainly evaluate whether or not I'm telling the truth, that I try to just kind of model the way I behave myself in school in a way that reflects those values. Making sure that my students understand that their opinions are valued, whether I agree with them or not in my classes, and that, I won't certainly make a student not talk or uncomfortable because their ideas are unpopular. And I think that really leads kids to understand that why it's significant, why it's important to have these ideas, and that you don't need to spend time ideally we would spend time talking about all of the values that go into the UDHR, but there are other things that pull on our time, and I think it's important that kids understand that it doesn't have to be a direct lesson in order to be able to further it, and provide kids a lens to see what's out there. And I spend a lot of time talking with kids about the fact that, mentioned Gandhi and some of these folks who are big names, but they weren't born big names. Nobody tapped Martin Luther King and was like, by the way, when you turn 30, something important is going to happen, and then you're going to have your time to shine. I think it's important that kids recognize that it comes from a strong foundation. So that's kind of what I do with kids, and I hope to continue to do with kids for many years. And I don't know, I think Elizabeth could probably share a little bit about how that works on her end as well. So.
Sure. Do you want me to talk about the project we did? Is that?
If you had to, if it's all right, Karen, could you talk for like 30 seconds?
Yeah, just quickly, so we make sure we get to hear from everybody. Absolutely.
Go ahead, Elizabeth, talk about that.
Yeah. Okay, sure. So like Mr. Buckley said, we did a project at the end after our AP exam. He actually introduced it. We did like our final project all with the RFK curriculum. And then later on, my senior year, I did an independent study where I focused on Kailash Satyarthi. I read through Carrie's book. And then I focused on Kailash, and Mr. Buckley definitely spent a lot of time. Like, we talked through just his story and how he started from a young age. I remember that was one of the things that we both talked about. And then in the end, I actually ended up composing a piece for the composition contest and submitted it for that. So that was kind of the culmination of our project. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we have our contests are always good places. So Pam, can you share a quick story?
Sure. Well, it's hard to believe that it's been 10 years since we wrote that original curriculum in Albany. I just, it seems like yesterday in some ways. So I think for, Speak Truth to Power has given me a framework to integrate with all of my lessons. And similarly to Chris, I whatever curriculum I'm teaching, I take one of the defender stories and I integrate it via the concepts of courage, compassion, or perseverance. And one of the most important things it gave to me, relative to what Adnan was saying earlier, is developing really strong universal connections, emotional universal connections between students' own experiences in their own life to get what Karen mentioned earlier, that motivational piece, that inspiration to feel almost like similar in the footsteps or in the shoes of a human rights defender from Speak Truth to Power. So conceptually and thematically using the curriculum, connecting to other existing stories, but on the other hand, for the advocacy initiatives over the past 10 years, I've had the opportunity and the honor to be involved with Haiti and in India with Kailash and Loon Viaud's organization. And I wanted to try to use my own actions to provide an example for my students to connect them to these groups of people. And we came up with an idea of creating the visual drop as Adnan started with the Ripple of Hope quote from the beginning, where the students could visually see the Ripple of Hope quote depicted as a wave growing, and each drop was $1, represented $1 if we were raising money for something particular, which they did over the years. For right now, we're actually tapping into Stephen Bradbury's story, and also today I taught a lesson on Hamid Ulukaya, from the CEO of Chobani, who won the RFK Ripple of Hope 2017 award. And we feel it was an important connection with food security and the COVID-19 going on right now. And so through the Ripple of Hope and Becoming a Change initiative, students have raised, we're trying to raise about $1,000. But, you know, again, this sense of community and inspiration, and I think the lessons that I've learned is that to try to connect my students to the fact that global causes are our causes, and that Speak Truth to Power defenders portray that the best because of our humanness, and just, you know, that the inspiration comes from trust. And when you read their stories, when my students read their stories and the biographies and the lessons, you trust what they're saying because it comes from the heart. And weaved throughout Carrie's interviews. And for my students, I think by them taking action over the years, they've experienced, it provides this sense of a transformation for them, going from learning content, learning about an issue, taking in what we've all talked about today, to a metamorphosis of experiencing themselves for the first time, not only as a citizen or an identity as who they are individually in their town, but as a citizen of the world. And how Speak Truth to Power provides a universal framework for students becoming a part of the world, and the issues that are portrayed and fought for by our Speak Truth to Power defenders.
Thank you, Pam. So I know we're at our stop time, but I know we also have some really amazing educators, both formal and non-formal, on the call. So I have this upcoming page here so folks can see what's coming down the pike for us with our speaker series. But for folks that can stay on and who would like to kind of share stories about, I mean, the questions I have, how have your students taken action? And as an educator aiming to inspire your students, what have you learned? If folks can stay on and share, I would welcome that very much. We are recording this so we can capture it. If folks need to jump off, I understand that as well. So just kind of want to open it up to the community.
And crickets.
Yeah. Okay, that's okay. I get it.
I would just advocate for the projects and giving something meaningful for kids. I think one of the parts about it is that kids often see schoolwork as being something that they have to do and that is busy work, as opposed to having some kind of meaning to it. And the more meaningful it can become, kind of like what Pam was mentioning, I think is important. And I think that that's a really important side to it can be in any discipline. It doesn't just have to be social studies or the humanities, but having it connected to something meaningful, having the work being meaningful. That's why I think the projects that RFK provides are so useful, because, like in Elizabeth's case, she composed a piece of music, but then putting her name on it and submitting it to a program is a piece of activism. Small piece, but it's something that kids can do, and it's a good low bar to get them started. So I think that's a really important component to this.
And one of the things that I was saying before that connects into that in the breakout group was the importance of the students being able to kind of make those local connections, so that it's something that they're passionate about, but also that they can make the connection that this is how I see human rights kind of being played out in my local community, or in the school, or in the town, or whatever, making those connections as well.
I wanted to add too, to piggyback off of what you're saying, Suzanne, is as a result of making those local connections, and one of the slides that Karen showed is that measuring the impact piece, I find that one very valuable for young people. Also, just in the culture, at least domestically speaking, trying to snowball that into them showing their immediate impact in the community through tangible data and evidence, whether it could be the form of an anecdote or impact story, or it could be hard data, right, in numbers. But to be able to show students, like, look at the impact you made, that in itself, like, goes a long way, because I think that if you miss that part, it's hard for a student to understand what that effort really went to. Like, to an extent,
What difference did it make?
Yeah, the inspiration and emotion part can go so far, but how do you keep it alive and going? And I think a lot of that comes from them being able to see, oh crap, like, through my efforts, I was actually part of feeding 100 people that wouldn't have had a meal. And then what does that mean for my commitment to poverty and food insecurity down the line? So that measurement piece is huge. And I'm excited for all of us to work together to build that out.
Adnan, if I could just add what you were just saying, is it's so right on about bringing it back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because even the project that my students were involved with this year, just coincidentally happened to just be for the soup kitchen, and just directly aligns with beyond the Speak Truth to Power Defender, going back and connecting it to that human rights, to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It just provides this like unbreakable foundation.
Absolutely.
All right, Fran. Oh, Matthew?
Yeah, just really quick. I found it interesting to observe how some people get involved in human rights through an international aspect and others on a local. And people are attracted to different things, or they're forced, or they're brought into it by one or two paths. And I remember living in El Salvador. I think I got more people involved on the local level in Cincinnati, Ohio, in the inner city, when they would come visit me in El Salvador. Because it was really interesting that churches, universities, high schools, all these people, and they would their revolutionary spirit would come out in El Salvador, hearing about all these stories and meeting the communities. And I was like, well, these people are no different than these people in Cincinnati, Ohio. Like, and people were like really sad having to leave the exotic, romantic, the La Lucha in El Salvador. It's like, well, when you go back to El Salvador, look for this guy, look for that woman, look for this organization. And it was interesting. And I think for students, it's super important on a local level. Here in Mexico, I've met some wonderful environmental activists, human rights defenders, but focused on the environment. Mm-hmm. And this guy told me once, no one's gonna care if this forest gets cut down unless if the people come and enjoy the forest. If you know the tree, you're gonna wanna protect the tree.
Mhm.
And I think the same happens in our communities. In the United States, sometimes people want to focus on an international stuff, and they don't even know what's happening down the street on a human rights level. So it's not one is more important than the other, but how do we play off each other?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a comfort level, right? So if it's right in your face, it's a little harder to see, and you don't really want to see it, right? So you look at the shit happening on your corner, and it's like, but then you go someplace else, and it's like, oh yeah, there it is. Yeah. So I think, and that's the beauty of this work, right? So working together to navigate that, because where we end through that process is, I mean, transformed, right? It's popular education. It's like that. It's like, this is my world. To Pam's point, like, it's local. It's, yeah, that's the beauty of all that we're doing. And whether it's a training capacity, like you do, Matthew, or formal, like wherever it's happening, that educational ecosystem. I think these pieces, though, as facilitators, as educators, it's important that we hone our craft, so that as students are navigating, it can be scary and complicated, and we support them through that. So thank you. That's really important to recognize. So
I also love, like, during this time, you know, with my students, you know, watching them today on our Google Meet, they're living through this crisis as kids. And I don't think there's any better time for them to learn about these Speak Truth to Power defenders. Just to provide comfort and a sense of like transforming fear into feeling of hope. I just think it's crucial.
all right, friends. Well, I know I see we're almost 10 minutes over, so I want to respect your time. And I just want to say that if after these calls you have ideas, you want to get involved, please reach out to us at STTP@rfkhumanrights.org. We would love you to become part of what we're doing. We have a session this Thursday, and if you want to join every other Thursday, we'll have one this Thursday. We have an educator happy hour. We just kind of meet at 6 o'clock Eastern time. Whoever can join, joins. We just kind of chat and talk and share and be with one another. If you want to join that, just reach out to us and we'll make sure you get an invite. It's really great just to be with everyone in these times. And I think, Mitra, we need to get you to that. We have Dick there. I see Suzanne, Matthew, maybe you can join us. Would be really great. So please feel free to reach out to us about any of that. And unless there's anything else, I want to thank you all for joining us. And yeah, let's go knock that mother down. We got some work to do.
Share with
Thank
your
you.
network our defenders.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks,
Share your
everyone.
network.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye,
everybody.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye, Dick.
Bye-bye. Be safe.